So something I've been meaning to talk about for a while now, but I had to delay due to all the Assassin's Creed Shadows news, was the Game Developers Conference presentation Ubisoft Bordeaux did on their development of Assassin's Creed Mirage, where they shared lots of insight into their process for creating the game, how it quickly evolved from a Valhalla expansion, and most interestingly to me, lots of features they initially wanted to have in the game, but had to cut due to time and budget constraints. I think stuff like this is very interesting to look at and talk about, especially now that we know Ubisoft Bordeaux is actually starting development on another AC title, where we could see some of these cut features and ideas, now that they'll hopefully have more time and money to implement them. Although, I'm not so sure if I would want to see the first of which in the next game, because it's a little out there, but initially there was an idea to have a monkey companion in the game for Basim that could do parkour with him, help him create distractions, and even pickpocket. I find this hilarious because so many people were already saying Basim and the setting of Baghdad reminds them of Aladdin, and to know they were literally considering giving Basim a monkey companion just like Aladdin, crazy. We might as well have called it Assassin's Creed Aladdin at that point. The creative director even mentioned Aladdin as to why they thought of the monkey to begin with, but this idea was cut early on for several reasons. Firstly, Ubisoft Bordeaux was not well enough equipped with the time and resources to mocap a monkey for the animations, and the other reason is there were no monkeys in 9th century Baghdad, despite what Aladdin might make you think. I know, shocking. So while the idea of having a companion you could use to assist you in parkour and stealth would be pretty cool, I'm very glad this idea was cut. Having an assassin monkey companion I just think is a little too out there for this series, although granted there's way more unrealistic stuff in some of the other games, but I think for Mirage specifically, it would have shattered the more grounded feel of the game. Maybe they could try something like this in their next game, although the companion doesn't have to be a monkey. Like perhaps it could be a fellow assassin that you could command instead, like the older games. That would be great in my opinion. The next cut feature though were sandstorms, and this is something I actually mentioned in my initial review of Mirage, because Origins has a similar desert-like setting, and that game had these massive sandstorms you could encounter while out in the open desert, and it was really cool. And I had wondered why they didn't spring for something similar in Mirage, and now I know why. What made it more difficult to have sandstorms in Mirage was that most of the world was the city of Baghdad, and it would be far more challenging to have a sandstorm go through an entire city, whereas in Origins, it would only happen in barren deserts. While having sandstorms dynamically go through the city as we're exploring would have been really cool, I think, it would have required so much extra work and would have affected basically everything, because they would have to create all new animations for all the NPCs to react to the sandstorms. It would affect how we'd play through the missions and stealth detection with lower visibility. I really think this would have been awesome, but it was probably just too much for it to be worth implementing for Ubisoft Bordeaux. You'd also have to consider how it'd probably affect the game's performance as well. Again though, if their next game is in a similar desert setting, which is probably unlikely, but if it is, hopefully we can see sandstorms make a return. The next cut was to an additional enemy type that actually made it into the alpha build of the game, and that were dogs and dog masters. I assume these would have functioned similarly to how dog enemy types work in other stealth games, where they can pick up your scent and track you down if you get too close, and then probably run you down. And while this may have added an extra wrinkle to stealth, it was ultimately cut because there wouldn't have been a non-lethal way to deal with the dogs other than the sleeping darts, which are not even available at the start of the game. And with many members of the team being animal lovers, and knowing a big chunk of the player base is too, they didn't want to have dogs be an enemy type in the game if there weren't ways to deal with them non-lethally. So it was cut from alpha, which I quite appreciate because as a dog lover myself, it always makes me very uncomfortable when you're forced to fight them in a lot of these games, even if it isn't real. Some people did take issue with the amount of enemy variety in Mirage, so maybe the dogs would have helped with that. Although there are probably other enemy types they could conceive to alleviate that problem in their next title. Now, those were the only cut features that the creative director was asked about, but there is a photo that includes a few other cut features. For one, we have the Mukarram district. So I assume this would have been a 5th district in the city of Baghdad, as we only got 4 in the final product. So it seems in the conception phase, there was an original plan to have 5. I didn't necessarily feel like the city needed another district, and that may have just caused unnecessary bloat to the world, so it makes sense why it was cut. There were also going to be what they called special attacks in combat, which I assume may have been something similar to the overpower attacks in both Origins and Odyssey, where you fill up a meter and get a special attack that deals a lot of damage. Something like that would have been cool to have in Mirage's combat system, especially since there isn't a whole lot of depth to the attacks you can do. Not sure why it was cut, it even made it to the alpha stage, but perhaps that's something we'll see in their next game. Interestingly enough, the mysterious shards that you can collect around Baghdad to get the Izu armor was initially cut and then revived in the beta of the game, which of course then made it into the final product, and I'm very glad it did. I felt that was a cool way of getting the Izu armor, and it gives you something else to do in the open world. It seems they also initially planned on having New Game Plus available on launch, but I would imagine they probably decided to hold off until post-launch to add it, so that they could focus on other areas of the game first. Which is fine, I'm just glad we got it. A New Game Plus on launch would have been nice, especially since it seems to be so rare to have it available right away in games these days. But at least we got it eventually, along with that fantastic permadeath mode. And finally, there were side story arcs that were cut. I'm very curious what these would have been. Perhaps instead of like the Tales of Baghdad, these would be side quests that had multiple missions and a whole arc to it. Again, I hear arc, and I think these would have been more long-form side quests, which is actually something I really would have liked to see in Mirage. In fact, when I made my video detailing everything I'd like to see in a Mirage sequel, longer, more fleshed out side quest arcs were one of those things, so hopefully we can see that as well in the next game. Especially since the creative director was already talking about in a Reddit post how he wanted a system where players could create and share their own contracts in the game. But that's it for those cut features. I do also want to give a special mention to something that was data mined a while ago for the game, which was a cut post-credit scene of the modern day. I didn't really feel the need to talk about it before, because the developers had said if it's not in the game, then it's not really part of the canon of what happened, but it is still very interesting, and possibly teases at the modern day going forward, as 2 Abstergo agents from the future are talking about how Basim's DNA that he gave to William at the end of Valhalla is a gold mine, as we see this antenna-looking thing in the middle of the desert. Very ominous. There's an actual cutscene and voice lines for this and everything, so I wonder why it was cut. It would have been a very interesting cliffhanger to leave the game on, and would have provided some context for the modern day, as it's essentially non-existent in the game. But who knows, maybe they decided to go in a different direction for the modern day story, so they cut it. It is still a very interesting watch if you haven't seen it yet. But that's all the cut content we know of for Assassin's Creed Mirage. I'd say for some of these ideas, it's probably for the best that they got cut, but there are others like the sandstorms, special attacks, and side quest arcs that I would have liked to see in the final game. But perhaps they will be in Ubisoft Bordeaux's next AC game, which they've practically confirmed they are working on their website, as we discussed a couple weeks ago. But what do you guys think about this cut content? Which of these ideas would you have liked to see in the final product? And what do you hope to see in the sequel or spiritual successor, whatever you want to call it, that Ubisoft Bordeaux is working on? As always, if you enjoyed the video, I'd appreciate it if you left a like and considered subscribing to the channel if you're new. And other than that, thanks for watching and have a great rest of your day, Assassins.